Good evening, everyone. I'm Lori Hafner, the senior pastor here at Coral Gables Congregational United Church of Christ. We say this every time we gather, that no matter who you are or where you are on your life journey, you are welcome here. So we truly, truly mean that. And this evening, we especially mean no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, or what tradition or culture or background, faith community that you represent, we are so glad that you are here for such an important subject. I just want to mention that this congregation has always been a witness and has always made a bold statement about our work in the community and in the wider world, believing that we are part of a community that says that we are to love one another no matter what. And so we are so appreciative of this subject matter this evening. We are so grateful for our keynoter. And I personally am so grateful to Mosaic Miami, formerly the Miami Coalition of Christians and Jews, that has expanded so beautifully under the leadership of Matt Anderson. So I give to you now Matt Anderson, and he will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Matt Anderson, and I'm Mosaic Miami's Executive Director, and welcome to tonight's keynote on mobilizing against Christian nationalism. Thank you again to Lori for hosting us at this beautiful church. And Lori, congratulations on 100 years of doing meaningful work in this community. At Mosaic Miami, we are hyper-focused on embracing diversity and building an inclusive Miami. We've been doing that for 90 years. Throughout Miami's history and throughout troubling times, our faith leaders are our North Stars, and we've been really focused on creating spaces for this diverse community to listen and find common ground. It's a scary, divisive, and complicated time for this country. And within all that darkness, I see little glimpses of light and hope. And today is a really special day. We're bringing two storied organizations together, and Mosaic Miami is so excited to begin our partnership with the Interfaith Alliance's CEO, Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch, and his team. Today, we began our partnership with a really special training titled The Road to Interfaith Advocacy. We had 20 committed members of the community with us this morning, and it was a really memorable time where we came together, because at the end of the day, it's all about digging deep and putting together meaningful relationships to unite us. And that gave me tremendous amounts of hope. Some of the takeaways from our training this morning were that we have to show up in unity in order for us to be heard and for action to take place. And we talked about the power of personal stories. Speaking of powerful personal stories, I'm excited for us to hear from Paul today as it relates to Christian nationalism. Across this country, Christian nationalism is on the rise. It shows up in the media, in politics, and in houses of worship. And this presents a real threat to both religion and democracy. Interfaith leaders are uniquely positioned to take this head on. Paul will speak about how religious pluralism is a distinct and important part of American identity. In the face of rising anti-Semitism Islamophobia, and other forms of hate, Paul will offer a message of hope and a positive vision for the future of our democracy. Before I bring Paul up, I want to share you a piece of his powerful personal story. The Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch is a president and CEO of Interfaith Alliance. An ordained Baptist minister, Reverend Rauschenbusch is a longtime leader in the interfaith movement, working to protect an inclusive vision of religious freedom for people of all faiths and none. As the great-grandson of the first Jewish Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis, and great-grandson of Baptist theologian Paul Rauschenbusch, a key figure in the social gospel movement, Rev. Rauschenbusch's commitment to interfaith advocacy comes in part from his own interfaith background. Prior to coming to Interfaith Alliance, Rev. Rauschenbusch served as senior vice president of the Auburn Seminary, the founding and executive director of HuffPost Religion, associate dean of religious life and the chapel at Princeton University, and a founding editor of BeliefNet.com. Most recently, he was the senior advisor for public affairs and innovation at Interfaith America. In addition to his work as president, Reverend Rauschenbusch also serves as host of State of Belief Radio, Interfaith Alliance's weekly radio show and podcast. Reverend Rauschenbusch previously hosted Huffington Post podcasts altogether, where he interviewed a diverse array of guests working at the intersection of religion and politics, including President Jimmy Carter, Patti Smith, RuPaul, Bishop T.D. Jakes, and Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory. Reverend Rauschenbusch has spoken about religious diversity and the importance of inclusive religious liberty at colleges, churches, and institutes around the country, including the Chautauqua Institute, the Center for American Progress, the New American Foundation, and the Aspen Institute. He is regularly invited to offer commentary on issues of religion and civil rights in national outlets including CNN, CBS, ABC, MSNBC, NPR, New York Times, Washington Post, Al Jazeera, BBC, The Hill, Vice, and Religion News Service. He has published 2 books and contributed essays to several volumes on faith in public. So one word, and I think that's wow. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up my new friend, Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch. Let's put our hands together.
Well, of all the things I've done, my favorite new thing that I've done is become a new friend of Matt Anderson. So I am just want to start with some thank yous also to, especially to Pastor Hafner and to the congregation and staff of this wonderful church. It's such an honor to be here. I'm glad to be in the sanctuary and to be with all of you. I also just want to, again, thank Matt and everyone at Mosaic Miami, as well as Reverend Capo. I feel like we've been thinking about this for so long, and to be here and to make it real, to be with you and to be with all of you is just such a privilege. I also would like for my colleague Maureen O'Leary to stand up, please. Maureen O'Leary is our Director of Field and Organizing. She is responsible for our work all across the country. We have affiliates across the country, and Maureen helps work with them, so not only do they do great work in their own communities, but they get to know one another. So people in Iowa are getting to know what's happening in Southwest Florida, and vice versa. It's an opportunity for information sharing. Maureen is such a great person, comes from a background that uniquely positions her for this work, and we're both so honored to be here with you representing Interfaith Alliance. And so I just preamble, I'm thrilled, and we're going to have a great time together. So I want to start my remarks with a bit of personal history to share with you how I enter into this conversation about religion in America. And this is also an invitation for each of you to think about, how do you enter into this conversation about religion in America? For me, my great-great-grandparents on my father's maternal side came to the United States after the uprisings of 1848 across Europe that were known as the People's Spring. Some of my great-great-grandparents lived in Vienna and others in Prague, but all experienced the restrictions, the taxations, and the degradation that came from being Jewish in the Christian-dominated European continent. One of my Jewish ancestors was named Joseph Goldmark, and he was a central figure in the revolution that took place in Vienna against the monarchy. When the uprising was successful, Joseph was part of the first Reichstag in the history of Austria that was formed with an intent to represent the people. The government only lasted for 18 months, but before it was dissolved, when the monarchy was restored to power, and Joseph was forced to flee as a fugitive to America, before it was dissolved, they passed several groundbreaking laws that included freedom for the serfs, freedom of the press and the arts, as well as lifting restrictions on the Jews. Unfortunately, when the People's Spring was crushed, the laws protecting Jews were quickly nullified, and retribution in Vienna and Prague and across Europe against those who had participated in the uprising was severe, and in many cases specifically targeted Jews who had taken part. So Goldmark, along with my other ancestors, the Dembitz, the Wileys, and the Brandeis families, picked up their lives and moved to America. Arriving on these shores, my ancestors experienced freedom previously unimagined for them, a place where they could have dignity for who they were, no matter what religious background they came from. The freedom of religion was truly amazing to them, and they wrote back to their family members in Europe expressing their love for their new country. Now, some of you may be asking how these Jews had a descendant who is a reverend, but we will save that story for later if you're interested. But the important point is that the freedom my ancestors experienced was not an accident. The founders of America were thoughtful and intentional about the role religion would play in the country, and they inscribed that intention in the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. In the Constitution itself, the only time religion is mentioned is to prohibit a religious test for holding office. The Constitution reads, "No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States." It simply could not be clearer. For anyone who is suggesting today that America was founded as a Christian nation, they are arguing against the First Amendment and the Constitution. My Jewish ancestors arrived less than 6 decades after then President George Washington wrote his famous letter to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island, assuring them of their equal status in the United States, telling Jewish congregants all possess alike liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship. It is now no more that toleration is spoken of, as if it was by the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. For happily, the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. And if we needed more proof that the founders did not intend the United States to be a Christian nation, the Treaty of Tripoli makes it explicit. Now, hands up, who has heard of the Treaty of Tripoli? You are in good company. Almost no one has heard of the Treaty of Tripoli. But this is really important. It was written by George Washington in 1796 to avoid a war with Muslim nations over trade. The treaty was signed by John Adams and ratified unanimously by a Senate that was still half filled with signers of the Constitution. And the treaty reads, and I quote, "As the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religious, or tranquility of Muslims, and as said states have never entered into any war or active hostility against any Muslim nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinion shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between two countries. This is a treaty that was signed by the founders of our country. And it is, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on a Christian religion. Thomas Jefferson, the third president of America, reinforced the First Amendment and coined the phrase, the separation of church and state, and showed his comfort with a diverse religious America by quipping, "It does me no injury for my neighbor to believe in 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg." I mention all of these examples because the next time someone says to you that America was founded as a Christian nation, they are factually incorrect and intentionally misleading, rewriting history and attempting, and this is really important, they are attempting to superimpose a religious hierarchy onto a country that was founded intentionally to do just the opposite. I have a podcast called The State of Belief, which is a shameless plug, and you should all subscribe to it. But I do have a great podcast, and I interview many of the leading scholars on Christian nationalism. And recently, I interviewed Princeton historian Kevin Cruz, who explained, despite the founders' intention, later generations of Americans began to assert that the country they created was indeed Christian. I'm going to take a brief moment for a service like a PSA. So my last person who I interviewed was this week, and it was Rob Reiner and Dan Parkland, who have made an amazing film called God and Country that is coming out on February 16th. It is about Christian nationalism. It is incredibly well done. It's about 90 minutes long. It's going to be in theaters, but also you're going to be able to stream it very soon. I really hope you will watch it because it crystallizes all of what I'm talking about in 90 minutes and does a really vivid job. I've had a chance to see it, so I strongly recommend it. Claims of being a Christian nation have also come with an implicit white supremacy that really translates to a white Protestant nation. My family experienced freedom in their new country in part because in the mid-1900s, Jews of Northern Europe were granted a kind of temporary status as white. However, the reality that they confronted was that a large portion of the population that was not white was also not free and not considered American. The brutal institution of slavery had been part of the same country that espoused the values of freedom since the beginning. Just a few years after my ancestors arrived, the Supreme Court decided in the odious Dred Scott case that upheld slavery and further ruled that Mr. Scott was of African descent and so could not be a citizen and therefore had no right to sue. The toxic mix of racism and religious bigotry was apparent in the 1920s when the Ku Klux Klan marched 50,000 strong down the streets of Washington, D.C. against the full rights of Black Americans, Jews, and Catholics, explicitly threatening violence against them as their ranks formed a white hooded cross that moved down Pennsylvania Avenue. In the 1920s, laws were passed to restrict immigration through a quota system that promoted immigration from Western and Northern European countries to keep out the perceived dangerous influence of Catholics and Jews from Eastern and Southern Europe. These laws were also used against Muslims and Hindu populations from the Middle East and South Asia that had been growing in this country. Again, the aim was both to restrict non-white races as well as non-Protestant religions. In the 1950s, in response to the perceived threat of atheist communism, both inside the country as well as hysteria about what might happen within the country, the phrase "one nation under God" was introduced to the Pledge of Allegiance And in 1949, and again in 1954, the National Association of Evangelicals proposed a constitutional amendment to put God and Jesus in the nation's constitution. And it is worth noting that they were defeated by a coalition of Christian and Jewish groups. The effort to put God and Jesus in the Pledge of Allegiance and the Constitution only further underscores the fact that those words were not there to begin with. Exactly the reason they were not there to begin with is the reason that the recent Christians have tried to impose them. So I'm going to make a point here in this church that is obvious, but it needs to be made. Religion is too often used for terrible ends. A powerful strain of religion was instrumental in undergirding slavery. Religion professor Harry Stout of Yale University wrote, "White Christians in the South didn't just support slavery. The Southern Church was the backbone of the Confederacy and its attempt to keep African Americans in bondage. Southern clergy had no doubt that slavery was not a sin." This support of white supremacy and oppression of black Americans continued after emancipation, through Jim Crow, the battle over civil rights, and continues on today. Religious claims from the 1600s were also inherent in the doctrine of discovery, used to legitimize the abrogation of rights and the takings of land of indigenous people for the last 4 centuries. And this doctrine was only renounced by Pope Francis last year. These are just 2 examples, terrible examples, that remind us when we talk about freedom of religion, as so many like to do today, we have to pointedly ask, whose religion and whose freedom? The language of the First Amendment makes clear that freedom to believe as we choose is unalienable. However, it is not unlimited. The freedom of conscience to believe what we want exists side by side with civil rights that ensure that every one of us can engage in our democracy with equal rights and dignity. How we should engage one another is perhaps summed up in the legal truism, "Your freedom to swing your fist ends where my nose begins." The tension between religion and democracy has been present since the inception of our country. Throughout our history, it has taken many forms. Today, it is called Christian nationalism, and its proponents are attacking the principles of religious freedom that America was founded upon and represent an existential threat to our democracy. Christian nationalists revel in denying our history and proclaiming our country a Christian nation that they conveniently make in their own image. They are determined to impose the imprimatur of their narrow faith tradition upon the laws of the land, using the power of the courts and of government. And perhaps most dangerous of all, they use the rhetoric of a Christian nation with its underpinning of white supremacy, xenophobia, patriarchy, and authoritarianism to dictate who is a true American and who will be relegated to perennial outside status, to be tolerated at best, just in the manner that George Washington declared should never happen. The goal of Christian nationalism is the establishment of a theocracy. As Catherine Stewart explained, Christian nationalism is an ideology. It is a political movement and a quest for power. Unfortunately, Christian nationalism is not relegated to the shadowed corners of our country. A poll released last year by Public Religion Research Institute and Brookings indicates that close to 30% of Americans are either adherents or sympathetic to Christian nationalism. And among white evangelical Protestant, that number jumps to nearly 2/3. Over 1 in 4 Americans believe that the United States should declare itself a Christian nation. Not surprisingly, Christian nationalists hold remarkably higher negative attitudes towards the rights of Black Americans, immigrants, Jews, Muslims, LGBTQ people, and the role of women. I can't go through all of them, but just to focus on attitudes on race. The historian Andrew Whitehead explained that racist attitudes are the strongest predictors of Christian nationalist belief. In a poll conducted by PRI, close to 80% of Christian nationalists disagree with the statement that generations of slavery and discrimination have created conditions that make it difficult for many Black Americans. The poll also shows that among avowed Christian nationalists who are white, 85% believe that discrimination against whites is as big a problem as discrimination against blacks. So it is no wonder that Christian nationalists are behind the effort to ban African American Studies AP classes. It is not surprising that they don't want people to say gay. It is not at all surprising that they are banning books. No wonder there is increased anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and hate overall, because it is deeply grounded in the Christian nationalist worldview of how they want our country to look and act, and they are determined to get their way. Catherine Stewart also wrote in The New Republic that Christian nationalists are increasingly framing their efforts as a spiritual battle that resonates with many of its charismatic and Pentecostal followers. Christian nationalism pits the power of Jesus, which is conveniently their side, versus the power of Satan, which, it will not surprise you, is me and probably many of you. This is not only being preached in churches, mind you, but more elected officials are taking on this language. Governor Sitz of Oklahoma prayed after his reelection, "Father, we just claim Oklahoma for you, every square inch. We claim it for you in the name of Jesus. Father, we can do nothing apart from you. We don't battle against flesh and blood, but against principalities of darkness." So what should a person of another religious tradition or political tradition think about their standing when the highest official in the land is praying in such a way as to explicitly put them in a second-class status? In his last successful campaign, your own Governor DeSantis quoted Ephesians from the Bible when he claimed that the mantle of God against all who would oppose him, saying, "Put on the full armor of God, stand firm against the left's schemes. You will face flaming arrows, but if you have the shield of faith, you will overcome them." And in Florida, we walk the line here. So you probably all noted that he replaced what is in the Bible as the devil with the left. And just last week, former President Trump shared a video that declared, quote, "God gave us Trump." And the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, declared himself a Moses for this time. When people are declaring themselves agents of God and calling their opponents agents of evil, it puts politics into the zero-sum game of spiritual warfare, where all compromise is capitulation, and one must vanquish all foes as a religious obligation. Okay, one last piece of bad news, and then I promise we'll get to the hopeful, productive part of my talk. Part of the PRI poll asked this question: because things have gotten so far off track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. And Christian nationalists affirmed that statement at 7 times the rate of other Americans. And this number in the last 2 years continues to rise. Now, we all saw the results of this on January 6, 2021, in the deadly attack on our nation's capital by insurrectionists holding crosses and waving Jesus banners as they attempted to thwart the will of the people in the election and subvert our democracy. And support for that violence has only increased, while support for the January 6th insurrectionists has also increased. And I can tell you, or Maureen could tell you, of harrowing stories from across the country. In our newly formed Interfaith Alliance of Southwest Florida, where a rabbi spoke out against Christian nationalists on the school board and was followed back to his car and intimidated and threatened. Or in Fresno, California, where a church affiliated with our Interfaith Alliance of Central California held a fundraiser for LGBT people and had all the windows of their sanctuary broken by the Proud Boys who left their cards so they could know who did it. This is happening And if you are alarmed by all of this, you should be. We all should be. But that is not a cause to lose hope. One of my mentors is Ruth Messenger, a great leader in the Jewish community, who said, "Despair is not a strategy." So here it is. There is a glaring disparity between the intentions of the founders of our country to create a nation that would be welcoming to people of every religious tradition and belief, and the claims and aims of Christian nationalism in the 21st century. The good news, as of right now, is that Christian nationalism continues to be very unpopular. 70% of Americans reject the calls to declare America a Christian nation. Close to 75% of Americans say they prefer to accompany a country made up of diversity of faiths and not just Christianity. And 80% of Americans reject the idea that Christians should exercise dominion over all areas of American society. And Christian nationalist views on race, gender, immigration, and LGBTQ people are very unpopular and out of step with the American public. Demographic trends are also against Christian nationalism. The people who represent the core of Christian nationalism are older and white and evangelical Protestant, and all of those categories are in decline in this country. 20% ago, white Christians in America represented 54% of the population, and now it is 42%. America is becoming much more diverse in every way, including religiously, and including the rise among young people who adhere to no faith tradition but have deep moral and ethical commitments. What is animating the Christian nationalist movement today is the most powerful and worst motivators: fear. Trump tapped into this fear with his backward-facing MAGA motto of 2016. Last year at CPAC, Trump warned his followers, "This is the final battle. If we don't do this, our country will be lost forever." They have made their goals clear, and they are attempting to take and hold on to power, and as the polling shows, they are willing to do just about anything to achieve it. So it is up to all of us to make sure they are not successful. And I am here to tell you my deepest conviction: we are going to win. We are going to win because we have history and progress on our side. I recently asked Rabbi Sandra Lawson, a black queer Jewish woman, what gives her hope in the face of her life lived at the intersection of so many identities that are under attack in America. And she said, "Paul, to me, we've already won. I see we are no longer the country that my grandparents lived in. I see the progress that has been made, and we still have a long way to go." I was shocked by her resilience. But she is not someone who is Pollyanna or blind. She was recognizing the progress is possible when we work for it and don't let it slip away. Her perspective was reinforced by another powerful black civic leader named Eric Ward, who told me the biggest myth that the white nationalist movement and the Christian nationalists want us to believe is that we're losing. The truth is, we're not here because we're losing. We're here because the civil rights movement was actually victorious. It made the case that we should live in a multiracial nation grounded in democracy and equality. And here's the kicker: more Americans today, including white Americans by percentage, are supportive of that vision than at any time in American history. If we stand together and if we declare victory and refuse to lose, we will win. We will stand up to Christian nationalism by naming it and condemning it. And we will win by showing up and casting a compelling vision, a beautiful vision of our communities, our cities, our states, and our country that invites everyone to participate equally with dignity for people of diverse faiths and beliefs to live their life freely. Together we will celebrate an inclusive understanding of religious freedom and declare that freedom of religion means freedom for all. That freedom of religion means freedom from racial bigotry and violence. Freedom of religion means freedom to love whom we choose. That freedom of religion means freedom of women to make choices about their own bodies. Freedom of religion means the right to read and that we want to learn and read about the real history of our country. And freedom of religion means able to exercise the sacred right to vote in our democracy without intimidation and suppression. We will support the right that, yes, anyone can believe anything they want, but that doesn't mean they can do anything they want. Their right to swing their fist or their faith ends where our noses and our precious lives begin. Interfaith Alliance was formed almost 30 years ago, actually 30 years ago this year, specifically to counteract the outsized influence of the Christian coalition and the misnamed moral majority. The Christian right that claimed to represent the religious perspective and attempted to impose their vision on the rest of America. Since that time, we've worked with people of over 75 different faith traditions, as well as secular and humanist groups, to mobilize powerful, diverse religious coalitions who truly represent the will of the people in local communities across the country, as well as in the nation's capital. We will defeat Christian nationalism by representing ourselves in the public square, showing up as a diverse group of people coming together. We will show up at school boards. We will show up at city council meetings. We will show up at state legislators, at the voting booth, and in all of our civic and religious spaces, and insist that America is not just for some of us, but for all of us. We have to widen the circle of people who count in America, not restrict it. We cannot let anyone flatten the moral arc of the universe. I am a religious person, a pastor, and I reject Christian nationalism because it corrupts my Christian faith and preaches a false gospel of bigotry. I am an American who loves my country and is grateful to this country for the safe haven it offered my family 175 years ago. And I love my country enough to want us to recognize our past, repair what has been harmed, and commit to a future of America being a place of freedom for all people. Together, we will show up to defeat Christian nationalism by showing a wide inclusion and being led by a love, a respect, even for those Christian nationalists who may fear and hate us. In our movement, we will fight for everyone, including conservative Christians and other religious leaders, to be able to believe whatever they want and take their place in the mosaic of our nation. It is a part of the definition of democracy that we will live our lives alongside people with whom we disagree. And my deepest prayer is that we can invite people who think that Christian nationalism is the way they have to live out their Christian faith to join us in a wider circle of beliefs and backgrounds who truly want to live side by side with one another with mutual respect and understanding. In the wake of the anti-Semitic incident in Naples, hundreds of people signed up to be part of Interfaith Alliance of Southwest Florida and to stand together and say no to hate directed at their Jewish neighbors or any other group. In the wake of attack on the Christian church in Fresno that supported LGBT inclusion, the Jewish, Muslim, indigenous, and other leaders stood together in the sanctuary of that congregation and refused to let the white Christian nationalist terror campaign have the final word. We will show up for one another, Muslim, Jewish, Sikh, indigenous, Hindu, Jain, atheist, and Christian nations, all together, to protect one another's right to believe as we choose. In our movement, religion can be a bridge, not a bludgeon. In our movement, religion can be a source of liberation, not discrimination. In our movement, religion can be a part of celebration, not subjugation. In our movement and in our country, religion shall be part of the diverse democracy, not a power grab for an exclusive theocracy. Last year at a training that Interfaith Alliance offered in Dallas, Texas, a pastor stood up at the end of the day and told the group, "I just feel less alone." And that's what I pray for us here today, that we feel less alone, more equipped and inspired by one another to show up for one another. The greatest example of interfaith advocacy in America continues to be the civil rights movement and the indelible image of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., influenced by Mahatma Gandhi, walking side by side with Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. It brings me back to my great-great-grandfather in Vienna, Joseph Goldmark, who wanted freedom for himself and the wider Jewish community and was prepared to fight for it on the floor of the Reichstag. But when the time came for the discussion, it was his friend, a Catholic priest named Father Fuster, who stood up in 1849 and told the assembly why the Jewish struggle was his struggle. He said, "If we free the Jews, we free ourselves from the sway of Christian barbarism, of tyrannical Christian bigotry." That priest's liberation as a Christian was tied up in the work to free his Jewish compatriots from oppression, and we can and we will show up for one another and for our democracy that needs every one of us. One of the sons of the Jewish families that came to America from Europe was my great-grandfather Louis Brandeis, who became the first Jewish Supreme Court justice. And while he had much to say about the power of the courts and politicians, his most sincere belief was encapsulated in this quote: "The most important political office is that of the private citizen." This is our time. This is our calling. Fellow humans, let us rise up and work together to ensure a welcoming, diverse, and just America that celebrates e pluribus unum. Out of the many, may we be one. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. There is an opportunity for a conversation now, and looking forward to it. And again, thank you all for your attention. If you'd like to ask a question or a clarifying question or anything, my colleague Maureen can help with. Is that okay, Matt? And yeah, I'll do it. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for walking us through all that. It's super interesting. I cover religion at the Miami Herald, and as you were speaking, I was thinking of where Christian nationalism has shown up recently in Miami. I'm thinking about a school board meeting in October where a proposal to name October as LGBTQ month, solely in principle, kind of came up as the issue. And there were so many people who showed up to speak against that item. They had to extend the comment period. And most of those people were religious. And they were using arguments like, this is against my freedom of religion. I don't want my children to know about or learn about LGBTQ issues and things like that. And so, I'm hearing you say 70% of Americans reject this idea of a Christian nation, that it's not a popular thing, but it does seem, at least like in Miami, there's this very organized movement to show up in political spaces and make those religious arguments. So I guess my question is, what do you make of that? Do you think they are just more organized, or do you think that is a place where, pluralists and everybody here should show up and make their voices heard? I'm just curious what you think of that.
Yeah. Well, I think that I definitely think it is an organized movement. And so, the answer to your question is yes. There are groups that have completely been formed, and Florida is kind of a little bit of the ground zero for a lot of this movement of Moms for Liberty, for instance, and others who have really targeted this and are looking for issues. And so the question is, I think that there is often a narrative that we still are hearing, that those of us who want actually a pluralistic nation with rights of all citizens to be equal are somehow anti-religious. There's a narrative that there's a religious wing, and then there's the bad secularists who don't like religion, whereas actually that is a false narrative. The majority of religious people, for instance, support, in the case of LGBT, they actually support equality and rights. But almost it's, this is, many of the great movements in American history have been fueled by religious leaders. And so this idea of there's like the secular democracy people and the religious people is a false narrative, but they like to reinforce that, because then they say, my freedom of religion, my religion. And so people are very nervous about speaking out against religion. When I said whose religion, whose freedom, that is a really important place to land, asking whose religion and whose freedom. And reminding government officials that they are actually there they're elected to serve the entire population. And to recognize that everyone has a right to feel seen and heard in schools. And so, I think your question is right on. These are locations where this battle is happening. All of a sudden, by the way, there have been, school board battles for a long time, segregation, things like that. But over the last 2 or 3 years, a very concentrated, and they give out playbooks, and they get people to go, and they do big trainings. This is not a secret. And so the question is, and this is what we saw in Southwest Florida, Naples in particular, and so all of a sudden, the Interfaith Alliance of Southwest Florida started showing up and saying, actually, you don't speak for religion. You can't take the religious mantle, because there's all of us here. And so that's where the opportunity, hopefully for our elected officials, is to recognize the concerns of parents, but not let one group trump over everyone else. And I think that is what has been happening. But I think now you're beginning to see people, especially around book bans and things like that, people are getting activated. We are doing a lot on book bans at Interfaith Alliance. We're working with the American Library Association to help them develop a strategy, because they are getting slammed. People are terrorizing librarians. It's terrible what's happening. And so what I spoke at their national gathering of policy people, I said, you need a religion strategy, because otherwise they're going to take the religion mantle. But you have all sorts of people in the community who will support you. And so that's what I hope, is that people will stand up for librarians, for teachers, for others who are trying to do the right thing, and recognize and make sure that people know that there is a diverse religious community, as well as people who espouse no religion. And yet, where are their rights? So more, but you can, yeah, so, yeah.
I have a question.
Here.
You talk about nationalism on rise, and all of a sudden we see there is other phenomena coming up, DEI. People coming from minority communities, especially people like Dr. Rauschenbusch and others, who are demonizing DEI and immigrants, forgetting that they benefited because of that. And they are now repeating the same thing what white nationalists or they are saying it. When they talk about immigrants are all thieves and all that, they forget 95% of Fortune 500 companies are run by immigrants, especially from India. I'm part of India, so
Yeah.
I'm plugging in. So shamelessly.
Yeah,
so
you should.
That's the thing. The country was built by immigrants, and if it wasn't for diversity, some of these people would not have benefited. Harvard, they did not have a diversity program. Minorities did not be admitted to those schools. And all of a sudden, the same people are saying that DEI is the reason that our moral values are going down, our education system is going down. So,
Yeah.
how do you?
Well, thank you for that question. There's a close connection here. I have a friend who works at North Florida University. Our friend who worked, he ran the interfaith group at North Florida University. when the law, I think that your legislature passed against DEI, forced his religious work, his interfaith work, to shut down. They shut down faith work that was bringing people together from diverse traditions. And by the way, it was bringing conservative Christians together with people who disagreed with them, and they were having really productive conversations. All shut down. He had to leave the university because DEI was targeted. So DEI, not only was it important for just awareness of our country, because, you know, the opportunity is to understand the richness of our country. You know, that immigrants from India are an amazing asset to our country. And yet you have a certain ex-president who's talking about poisoning the blood of our country. Immigrants, that is the most outrageous thing you can say. It's directly out of Hitler's playbook. It's terrible. And the great replacement theory. Jews will not replace us. All of this, it goes so deep, and it's so terrible, and it's so racist, and we have to not be timid about calling it out, and we can't let people be getting away with it. It's really terrible. So, sorry, I'm on a tear. But thank you for your question, and to recognize that DEI does not only affect race and ethnic background or country of origin, it is affecting religion, because DEI, many religious programs, interfaith programs, are under DEI programs, and they're being shut down. So it has a direct effect on the future of Florida for understanding one another from different faith traditions, including conservative and more progressive traditions. It's a terrible, terrible step.
Hi. I wanted to touch on something that you said in your talk, and that's actually connected to what the reporter said about the school board. You mentioned the connection between Christian nationalism and violence, and the threat of violence. And when I think about myself and my desire to be a voice, step up, to show up, what stops me is that threat of violence.
Right.
And the school board, where my children go to public schools, is a perfect example. They stand out there, and they're threatening, they dox you on social media, and frankly, I didn't know that camera is pointed at me right now, because I can be identified on social media if a photo of me gets posted somewhere public. And I sound paranoid, I'm sorry. But I just recognize that I cannot be the only person who feels that fear.
No.
Like where is that balance of doing the right thing and showing up and being a voice that has the right to be heard when fearing what they might do to your kid at school, when they identify you and post your address and your phone number and your employer on social media, and how can we overcome that? And how can we even fight back against that? Because that's not right and that's not fair. And I guess that's my question. How do we not let that fear stop us? And what can we do about that violent component to this?
I just want to, if your blood isn't boiling right now, the fact that a citizen of Florida, of Miami, of this country, feels they cannot go and express their views in a public forum to their officials who are elected to serve them because they are so intimidated by terrorism. It's terrorism. They're using terrorist tactics to stop you. And I want to respect your right to say, I'm not putting myself out for that. It's you, but this is unacceptable for a democracy. This is the death of democracy. And so I don't have a solution for you because I want you to be safe. And I'm not going to stand up here and say, well, go. No. But what we need is a community that is thinking about why she can't go and how we surround ourselves with community care and making sure that people can speak up. And so, it's one thing for this rabbi to go, and that was intimidating enough. And he's a big guy, he's like me. And he was very, very intimidated and scared. And, but he had a whole community that would rally behind him. You're an individual who's trying to speak up for your children. This is terrible. And so I'm not going to tell you what to do, because I don't know you. I mean, but I thank you for your question, because it points to the need. It points to what's at stake. It points to the fact that people don't feel safe in their own community and talking to their own school board. And that's a failing. And that needs to be a story. And so I'm sorry to get, I'm looking at you as if I'm yelling at you. I am not. I am so appreciative. I'm so appreciative of what you offered us. And I'm so angry that I can't say, oh, don't worry about it. Everybody's like, we're all citizens. We all respect one another. That's not what's going on here. And it's not equal, by the way. It's not like everybody's doing it to everybody else. It's not that. And so it's important not to both sides of this. It's not happening in both sides. So I don't have a solution for it. All I can say is there has to be a way that people are organizing themselves in such a way to be safe to speak out in their government. And if it's not that, this is a crisis of democracy. This is exactly the goal.
So it seems to me that there is this cloak of religion, like the religious Christian nationalists, but really it's politics. Really it's politics and it's power. Because as I hear my friend back there talk about going to a school board meeting, I say to myself, what's the point? Why don't they shut that nonsense down? But there are these people in positions of authority and in power who could do more. There are the politicians, there are the elected officials who could say, no, you guys, we respect freedom of speech, but that is not freedom of speech, that's terrorism. And so I guess my question is, what do you think makes these folks so power hungry that they hide under the cloak of their religious morality to make everybody feel less than because they are better than? Where does that even come from?
Well, again, I'm going to reference God and Country as a great place that does what I think is an interesting job of talking about the Christian nationalist worldview, which is that everyone is coming to get them, and that they are martyrs, and that they are this last stand, and that that everything is being taken away from them, and their schools are being taken away from them, and it's very interesting because David French, I don't know if any of you read David French, he's in the New York Times, he's a conservative, very conservative Christian, who just is, and he is a talking head in this film, and he says, actually, freedom of religion jurisprudence has never been stronger than today. People have never had more power to use religion to, for instance, not serve someone a cake. Or not, there's lots of ways that people are free in this country to exercise their religion, and yet there is a constant drumbeat of fear and anger. And so the answer to your question is that it is a mindset that is insular, and that they are getting it from all sides. And so they have a feeling, and it is, and then, it is, the goal here is like they want a Christian nation made in their image. And by the way, I don't count in that. I'm not like part of their Christian, I'm like the first to go. But like they want and they are, again, this, this spiritual warfare, this sense of oppression, this sense of martyrdom drives them. And so I think they are, I think the rank and file are often operating under a genuine bubble mentality of this is what we have to do, because they have been told it over and over and over again. And somehow, I think that that's the reason it's so important. Every time I speak about this, in any setting, I say, I want conservative Christians to be part of this movement. I want people to be able to exercise their freedom of religion. So it is not against religion, but we can't let one group put it over the rest of us. But we are dealing with a very well-organized political machine. And, Trump has capitalized on it. And he has said, okay, this is going to be the jet fuel that is going to create, and then others try to do it too. And so in local and state and national. But I really do think that if we can come together, its days are numbered. We've had challenges before in this country, and we've met them. And I think we have to, I do feel like this year is a little bit make or break for our country. And so I'm feeling a great deal of urgency. And I hope people are too. But I do think that if we can come together, we have a better vision, a more inclusive vision. And so this political machine hopefully will break against the rocks of our democracy.
Hi, I wanted to ask, and I'm glad you brought up the fear, because I think most of the situations we face today are fear-based. And when we come together, how do we get through that fear? Is that an option, or is it, I don't know. Spiritually and psychologically, how do we get to that fear?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I like to talk about, I also speak at congregations about some of what congregations from different traditions can offer. And I think I had the honor of interviewing John Lewis, Representative John Lewis, Reverend John Lewis, during my time at Huffington Post. And he talked about how much preparation went into those who stood up in the civil rights movement. How much discipline, they had to go through training on the spiritual discipline of nonviolence, and the spiritual discipline of, and King talked about this a lot. And so my hope is that we can kind of spiritually ground ourselves to recognize where people might be coming from as we engage them. But I also I'll say this, my hope is that there's a persuadable middle who think, oh, I'm supposed to, what am I supposed to do? And we can have real conversations with them about how we view the world and how they view the world. That is kind of the tradition of politics. You can disagree on a lot of stuff, but you can find a way forward. I do think that there is a very hardcore group that is not interested in that. And I don't think we should spend a lot of time on that. But I think we should recognize that I'm also afraid. I mean, I'm really afraid. I'm afraid, that I'm a gay man with a family. That, I live in New York City, in Chelsea, and I'm afraid. Imagine across the country. But that's just one community. People are under attack. People are under attack. And so I understand fear, maybe from the other side, but how can we meet one another and be honest with one another and try to understand one another? And that is, I think it's a spiritual discipline. It doesn't have to be a religious, you don't have to, but I think that there is something where we can recognize fear in others and we can feel empowered to say, so tell me about where you're coming from. And I think sometimes just asking the question, showing curiosity, I think that's the greatest gift we can offer one another is curiosity. And so this is hard work, and it has to be set up right, but I don't think it's impossible. And by the way, people change. I've changed. You've changed. You've grown. You didn't we all change, we learn, we grow. Everyone should be given that benefit of the doubt, but also be safe and find situations in which that is possible. I think Mosaic is a great organization for this because people from different backgrounds and different political backgrounds can have conversations, important conversations. And Mosaic has a mentality and a framework that can hold it and allow people to actually come together, not just once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times, and get to know one another as people. And then that's how we change, as we grow and we learn from one another. So that's a plug for you, Matt. But I really believe it. And from everything I've just getting to know Matt and his own personality and his own heart, I feel is very in this space. And, you know, he has strong convictions, but he has really a heart for this kind of work of bringing people together. So I really hope for those of you who are not involved with Mosaic that you do take advantage of the, you know, just the great work that Matt and his team are doing.
Thank you so much for your comments. I really appreciate them. I have an observation. As I've observed this white Christian nationalist movement, I've noted that it's not just an American issue. It really is a global issue. You see the organization of similar movements in Europe. It's empowered in Italy. You have Marine Le Pen in France, in Latin America. You have expressions of that in places like Argentina. And they seem to be connected. It doesn't seem to be random. They actually seem to be working in tandem. Someone like Steve Bannon goes around and talks to Orban in Hungary. Orban comes over and is welcomed by the Republican Party as an icon of conservatism and religious nationalism and so forth. So part of my comment is, you know, how does one address that aspect of this, what I consider to be a threat to democracy? And then the other issue that I have a question about is the role of the media, particularly social media and the echo chambers that are out there that are spreading lies and misinformation, and the extent to which so many of these folks who subscribe to these beliefs seem to be impervious to reason, science, to facts. They just live in their echo chamber, reinforced by these media channels, and are resistant to any kind of reason. And so that is both an observation and a concern, because how do you deal with the psychology of that? If we are to survive as a democracy, we somehow have to work to live together as a nation.
Well, you know, that it's kind of like those are the very, very pertinent and big questions, and I don't have the right answer for it. But you're recognizing that this is not just an American problem, and it's not, and it's almost helpful to know it's not like a problem that is inherent in Christianity or in any one religion. It's a sense of people, you know, it's connected, I think, with the second question you had, with social media, with how people get information, with who's in, who's out, how you frame belonging, and how you frame like the essence of a country. And this is happening in Putin's Russia. It's happening, as you mentioned, in all these different places. So what I think is instructive is the similarities. I think it's worth looking at the similarities and wondering, like, how do we see what is happening, and how do we recognize that there are bigger issues than Christianity is flawed, for instance, because that would not get us where we need to go. It is a question of how religion is being mobilized in one way, in a certain way. I think India is probably the most similar example. You can correct me on this, but India really tried at its founding to recognize that there was diverse people within its country, and that it would be welcoming to all people. Like, I think it's in the Constitution, right? So India, like America, actually had this aspiration and saw diversity as a benefit. And that has somehow been flipped as diversity is a threat. And those people who we've decided are not us, who are, and are a threat. And so that's the reason I do think, I've been a social media guy since the beginning, just because I was involved in media when social media started. I was involved in actually digital media when social media started. So I remember the first day that Huffington Post got a Twitter account, and we all had access to it, and we were like, tweet, 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 so I've been like watching it, and religion and technology is something, it's another passion of mine. I don't think we can sit it out. I don't think we can just say, this is a problem. I do think that there is a need for concerted efforts. For instance, I was very gratified because someone on the team at your church did an Instagram reel with me this morning, and then Dina, other people followed it, and other people in Miami all of a sudden, they were following, and they saw, he's, and maybe some people are here tonight because of that, but there is an opportunity for us to show solidarity online with one another, especially as people use online as a tool for division. It is possible to use it as a tool for information sharing and inspiration, and you can learn from one another. So it's, in some ways, the technology got so far ahead of our understanding of how the ethical component of it and the opportunity for learning, we never got trained up. No one ever got trained up. And now we're seeing the people who are really good at it are the people who really use it for division. And so we have to somehow get people who are really good at it to use it for, and we have to identify, it's very hard right now because all of the social media companies are laying off any moderation. They're all gone. I mean, and so it's just it's a tough moment, but those are the challenges. Those are part of the challenges.
Okay, we have one more question here, and Reverend Tom, I'm going to pass it to you to close this out. But I just hope if you have further...
Right here? Is that? Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I just hope if you have further questions, maybe you'll stick around for the conversation. But Matt, myself, Paul, we'd be happy to speak with you and close this out.
First of all, thank you for coming here tonight. Learned a lot. I guess what I wanted to speak on is you touched a percentage of folks that are not necessarily, especially young folks, not necessarily involved with the church, but still have high ethical moral values. Considering that you've been affiliated with multiple organizations, universities, I'm sure you've been speaking into, have you seen any kind of movement from young adults against this national Christian movement at all? And if not, how do we get those folks to even consider coming to organizations such as Mosaic, considering it's faith-based? What are your suggestions?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and I really appreciate it. It is, I had the privilege of working in spaces where young people from all different backgrounds, religious, very religious, and non-religious, came together to talk about what we often had discussions, what matters to me and why. And I think young people are they are very interested in meaning, and they're active. They're showing up in many activist spaces. They may not be using the inspiration of a faith tradition, but they're coming out of it with real moral conviction. And most of them, if you invite them and say, hey, could we talk about what's motivating you? They will be glad to be part of coalition. As if you can find common cause, they're down with it. They're just not necessarily going to come, they're not going to necessarily come at it with a religious perspective like I will. But I will say more anecdotally, but there is almost an outrage that their lives would be dictated by someone else's religious convictions that are trying to be superimposed on them without their consent. And I think that young people right now are looking for reasons to show up against this moment. And the more we can the more we can all invite them into showing up, I think will be to the good. But I hope that they are included in all of our calculations because I think they're very invested. I will just say, from my own family, my nephews and nieces are very interested in religion, but they don't practice. Like, I have a niece who's graduating from Harvard, and she is taking all these courses at the divinity school. She doesn't know what she believes, and she's like driving my brother and his wife insane. She's like, "No, you're an economics major. Get out of the divinity school." They care. They really do care, and so I'm excited about the young people. Final shameless plug: The State of Belief. I hope you'll subscribe. But at the end of most of the interviews I do, I say, what gives you hope? And these are religious leaders from all different backgrounds, and civic leaders. Almost always, they say, the young people who I meet, who are doing amazing work, who are inspiring me every day. So I have the privilege of having met so many of those people, and so I'm always like very hopeful about them. But they also, I'm not sure that they have exactly the language. And so in some ways, it's our opportunity to share with them your wisdom, your expertise, your awareness, and help them expand their life as they continue to learn and learn from them. So that didn't really answer your question, but it's something we think about a lot at Interfaith Alliance. What is the future of interfaith work with a whole population who may not be grounded in religious traditions, but who we very much want to be a part of our coalition building? So thank you all so much, and thank you. Are we done? I don't know. I'm sorry. Oh, Tom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to preempt anything.
Thank you very much for that.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. Woo, thank you. I'll take a deep breath before I go on. I was going to ask you a question, but so I didn't get to ask. But one of the things I was going to say is, from my perspective, not giving airtime to negative white supremacists. And for us, we've taken ourselves off Twitter. And I see other people doing that as well. And I didn't know what you're feeling about that.
Oh, yeah, we're not really, I'm proud to say that I got hacked on Twitter and then I got banned for life. I've been on Twitter since the beginning. And so I don't know what happened, but then I just decided, you know what? I am not going to try to get back on this platform. So Interfaith Alliance is still on X. We almost never post anymore unless we have one thing that we're really trying to get it out there. But we don't, I agree with you. I mean, I think there's other platforms, and we've left X because we think it's, they're not even they're doing the opposite of good.
Right.
Facebook is not great, but they're not the opposite of good. They're just not great.
Well, my friends, thank you for coming. I'm despite my fall, I am Reverend Tom Capo, and I'm happy to say that I was part of bringing Paul here, and he'll be at my church preaching on how congregations can manage to deal with this Christian nationalism. But I want to say to you all, we come from different places with disparate paths, vocations, avocations, different political parties. I think we have different political parties here, holding an array of guiding life values and different belief systems. Different though we may be, we come together tonight because we dream of a better city, state, country, world. We are continuing to prepare ourselves for the work ahead. Work we'll be doing individually and together, and that we'll support one another. That no one has to be alone in this work anymore. Matt and I are going to have Maureen back Thursday, the second Thursday in March, from 10 to 12 to talk more about what we can do together to address white Christian nationalism. But I think from now on we have to hold in our hearts three essential guides: courage, compassion, and commitment. courage to dream of a healthier, less fragmented world, compassion to notice the needs and vulnerabilities of many in our community, and all that is in you that moves your hearts and your hands to soothe others that are in distress. And commitment to believe that every single effort made on the behalf matters. The things that we do together to fight white Christian nationalism, no matter how small they may seem, matter. So look around, my friends. Look at the people that are here. I hope you spend some time getting to know them are we going to have a little break after this? Yes, so get to know people here. We'll send out more information as things happen. These people are holding the same guides that you are. Courage, compassion, commitment. We're going to leave tonight with the wisdom that Paul has shared with us. Let our gathering and this presentation not be just a one-off, but a true beginning of a community bent on transformation. I promise you that this will not be the last time you hear from Mosaic or Interfaith Alliance, and I hope it will not be the last time we hear from each and all of you. Now may the Spirit that leads us in our search for truth and justice, the Spirit that impelled people to devote life and fortune to public service beyond hope of fame or pull for pride, may that Spirit be alive and renewed in us tonight and henceforth. Amen. Blessed be. Shalom. Namaste, everyone. Thank you.